Hey everyone, today I'm very excited to touch on a topic that I'm very passionate about. So this is going to be 7 things I wish I knew before I set up at my first card show. Now this video is applicable for anyone who's already setting up at shows or if you're just interested but have never really tried it out before. And the purpose with making the video is to really offer more content that I wish existed when I first started, because a video like this would have been very, very helpful to me. So when I talk in this video, I'm obviously speaking to you guys, the viewers, but I'm envisioning talking to myself when I first got into the hobby, and that's the biggest thing for me here. So speaking of getting into the hobby, a little bit about myself. So my name's Austin. I run a channel here on YouTube called Carlson Cards, so welcome if you haven't seen me before. I entered the hobby in 2020 during COVID, really just looking for a way to make friends. I went to my first card show, had a blast, and the rest is kind of history. If I totaled it up, I've set up at about 30 to 40 shows if I had to guess, including multiple different states. Some I flew to, some I drove to, and I've had just such a blast in the whole experience of card shows. So one thing with this, during this time between setting up at my first show and then where we are today, I moved states back home. And when I did this, there was no card shows in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. So something that you guys I think should be aware of is that I've actually since started my own show and really kind of grew it from the beginning. Because I have experience with running shows, I do get to see a lot of different kind of dealers. I think I have a pretty unique perspective on what helps people do well, and maybe what kind of is a frustration point for dealers and what people struggle with sometimes, especially if they're setting up for the first time, because I get questions a lot when I get new dealers who reach out to me and want to get a table. So my first tip for you guys is to not overthink it. I wish someone had told me this before I set up at my first show. And the left photo there is actually my setup at my very first show I went to. I remember I kept telling my wife that I was interested, I should say girlfriend at the time. I was interested, but I didn't really want to spend the money on a table. Plus, I don't have a fancy showcase. All these thoughts kept going in my head, reasons to not do it. So thankfully, my wife is awesome. She Venmo'd me $20. I used that for the table fee, and the rest, again, is kind of history. So a couple points I want to make with this specific slide is I would not worry about having a fancy showcase, having fancy signage or posters or business cards that you can hand out. I wouldn't worry about having a lack of cards, because in reality, it's going to be great to just set up and learn from it more than anything. Plus, it's a little nerve-wracking if you've never set up at something where you take money, you're selling and buying stuff, and you might be a little nervous about that side of things. But I would say the biggest thing, and you're going to get this theme from me throughout this video, is to just do it. You're going to learn so much by setting up. I would just go for it. And again, I hope the rest of these tips really help you make that jump and try it out. Because again, this is something I wish someone had told me, is just go for it. And I'm glad I did, and thankfully my wife gave me a push in that direction. So my second tip and thing that I wish someone had told me when I first started setting up at card shows is that pre-show prep is your absolute best friend. So what I mean by this too is that it's very easy to think, oh, I'll get there the day of and I'll figure some things out, maybe I'll price stuff there. And I want to emphasize that that usually isn't the case. A lot of shows I've been to, especially recently here in the winter, have been very busy. You really don't have a lot of time in the morning during the show. Now, you might have some downtime, but you have to keep in mind that the beginning of the show is a very busy time. So it helps to put the legwork in ahead of time. And there's a few important things that I want to say about getting cards ready. So I know on the top I say pre-show prep is your best friend, but I want to add to that value boxes are also your best friend. So if you're setting up for the first time and you have hundreds or thousands, some people have a lot of bulk cards to go through. One of the number one tips I would give is to make value boxes. So start by just getting a box that you can fill with $1 cards or $2 cards or $5 cards. Throw a sticker on the front that says the dollar price per card. And at that point, you're literally good to go. You can set up and sell your cards. Because a lot of worry and stress I always had at the beginning was I had to make sure every card was priced perfectly with the recent sale prices and all this. But on a lot of cards, really guys, if you are approximately at the right price, they will sell. So if you can kind of batch them into similar price points, I think that's going to be a good benefit for you for a first-time dealer. Even if you have a bunch of graded cards and they're between, let's say, $20 to $50, maybe you can have a $20 box and a $50 box or something along those lines. And then in addition, when it comes to if you have higher dollar cards or if you have a showcase, I would definitely recommend pricing your cards out. If you've been to a card show, you probably know what I'm talking about. You've run into dealers who don't price anything, then you ask them for a price, they got to look it up. As a customer, it's really frustrating. Honestly, feels like kind of a waste of time. So that's why I would recommend pricing out any cards you do have to price ahead of time. So that's a lot easier the day of. And again, that's what I kind of mentioned at the beginning. You might think, oh, I'll price these last 30 cards when I get there in the morning. But trust me, you're not going to have time. It gets a little busy right away. And then quick final note, pack your car the night before. It's going to make your life so much easier in the morning. So the third thing I wish someone told me about setting up at my first card show is to get there early. I know it's hard for some of us because we don't like getting up early. I'm a freak. I love getting up early, so I don't have that problem. But it's very important to get there in time to be able to set up. And if you have your car packed like what's shown here ahead of time, it's going to save you a lot of time in the morning so that you can get there, get your stuff out, set up your table, and be ready to go. There's two big benefits to this. First and foremost, if you want to, you can go around and buy from other dealers, which is awesome, and it's a lot of fun. You can get some of the best deals before the show. And the other, I think, bigger benefit is you can sell to other dealers if you get there early and you're set up. And a lot of times, guys, some of the shows I've set up at, especially some of the early ones, a lot of the sales, or especially the higher dollar amount sales, happen right away in the morning. Because that's honestly when some dealers might come to your table, buy something, go to their table, set it back out for a higher price, which might sound a little weird, but trust me, it's a good thing because you're selling cards before the show's even started. Another note with that is that I've found some of the higher roller people, or kind of people who come with a very distinct purpose to buy cards that morning, they'll actually come before the show starts. So I've been surprised at how many small shows I've been to where there's people who come in, clear the whole floor, they go buy really good stuff from every dealer, and they're out the door before the show's even fully started. So that's the main benefit of getting there early. Again, I would highly recommend it. Just set that alarm 30 minutes earlier, an hour earlier. For me, just FYI as well, it usually takes me about an hour to set up. So if a show starts at 9 or 10, I usually try to get there an hour 30 before the show. So the fourth thing I wish someone told me is to bring a helper with you if you can. These shows can get kind of overwhelming, especially if you go to a good one that's very busy and has a lot of foot traffic. And so it can get difficult dealing with somebody and then also keeping an eye out on the rest of your cards, make sure somebody doesn't steal something. That's why it's really beneficial to bring a helper. My wife, Jenna, she's great at it. I've set up also with friends before, which is a great option for you guys if you're new, especially if you don't want to pay the whole table cost. It doesn't hurt to set up with a friend, split the table in half, and you guys each pay for half the table cost. And one funny note with this even as well, at a card show I went to in November, I actually got my grandma to come set up with me, which was a huge success. All the old guys that come in, they loved her, and they were just chatting it up, hung out at the table, and I had a blast hanging out with my grandma. So if you have someone in your family even too that you want to spend time with, and there's someone who likes this kind of thing, it could be a lot of fun because she knew nothing about sports cards, but she was really good at managing the table, and honestly it was again a good moment for me to spend time with her and hang out. So the fifth thing I wish someone told me is to prioritize making connections more than making sales. So this kind of ties into your perspective of looking long term instead of short term. If you're setting up for the first time, you don't sell something for the first couple hours, you might get a little down on yourself. But the way I would actually quantify if your show is successful is the amount of connections you make for the future. So you're going to be set up by other dealers. It's a great opportunity to talk to them, get to know them, learn from them. Get that intel. They've been in the trenches. They know what's going on. Ask them what's been selling well. Ask them what kind of shows they've been to, if they recommend any other shows. And the biggest thing too with this, and it applies to customers as well, is to get their name. It's really crucial to get someone's name, as I'm sure you're aware, in almost any industry, right? If you know their name and you remember it, it's a very powerful thing. It's very personable. People will remember you because of it. And I think it's very undervalued how many times that you run into the same people at these shows. So it's super crucial to get on a friendly relationship with them because you never know when you're going to have that card that they need or they might have one that you need. And it's going to help to be friendly with them already because it's going to be a lot easier to make a fair deal with them. So one thing with this though as well, I've always majorly struggled with learning names. So I'm going to teach you guys in about 60 seconds how to memorize a name for somebody. So let's say I meet a customer, comes up to my table, they don't end up buying something, but on the way out I'm going to say, hey, what's your name by the way? I shake hands, I find out their name is George. So what you have to do right when you hear a name is you have to associate it with something that reminds you of the name. So when I hear George, I think of the cartoon Curious George that I used to watch as a kid. I don't know what the show is about. You'd have to look it up. I don't remember at this point. But the thing is, if I associate that name with George, it's going to already help me memorize that name. The next thing you have to do, and this is all very quick, you have to find something physical about their appearance that is memorable to you. So let's pretend this guy George is an absolute hoss. He's got some big cannons, big biceps. That's a really distinct feature and you're going to remember that. So what the next thing you do is you take your association and you also tie it to the physical aspect of them that you remember. So now my memory of George is not just, oh, that's right, Curious George. It's now, I have a thought in my head of a giant jacked monkey named Curious George chasing me down an alley trying to steal my sports cards. And the reason you do this is because it makes it very distinct in your mind. So now the next time I see George, I'm going to think, oh, that's right, I see his arms, he's jacked, I remember this guy. And then you think jacked, oh, that's right, Curious George, he was chasing me down a hallway trying to steal my rookie cards. And then you connect the dots right there. George, hey George, how's it going? It's good to meet you again. And I promise I didn't make this up. I had to research this to learn it, but it's helped me a lot, so I hope this is helpful to you guys as well. The other note here too, if you have an Instagram, if you have a Facebook, or you want to get a phone number, that's a good time to grab that too. Because again, you never know when you're going to bump into people down the line. It's really important to be cordial and keep that good relationship with everyone you meet. So the sixth thing I wish someone told me when I first set up at my first show is that every show is a learning opportunity. So I remember some of the first couple I went to, I brought certain players and cards that I really enjoyed. But if you're setting up as a dealer, you want to be sure that you're bringing stuff that also, people are interested in. So it makes sense, if I'm setting up in Wisconsin, I want to bring maybe Bucks or Packers or Badger players. Whereas if I'm setting up in Michigan, it's a very different story of who I want to bring. Aaron Rodgers in Michigan probably does not sell as well as Aaron Rodgers in Wisconsin. And this is just an example of something that I learned in one of my first shows, but who knows what you guys are going to learn, and that's the point. You got to set up to learn these things. Because one note I will make too is a lot of times you're going to run into people, they're going to ask for a certain player. What I would actually recommend doing is having a little notebook and writing down how many times you get asked about each specific player. And this is easier if you're naturally already asking people, hey, are you looking for anyone in particular today? Is there any players you're hunting for? And at the end of the day, you're going to have a list of players with tally marks of how many times people asked about it. Now, the reason you want to do this is because if you're going to set up at another show in the future, it'll be really crucial that you get that player in front of you on your table for selling. Because if someone asks me about Giannis 15 times, that's kind of on me as the dealer to improve my business by going and pursuing cards that people are looking for. And like I said at the very beginning, the reason this is important is because if you're a collector, you can go buy that specific player. For me, it would be Giannis, again, example. Bring it to my show, sell it, and then I can take that money that I profit from and go buy cards for my collection. And that's kind of the circle of life in this whole thing as a dealer. One other note I'll make with this too is it's really important to stand out as a dealer and kind of have a feel for your table. You'll get better at this over time, but it's almost tied to your brand of sorts. So for instance, if you find me at a card show, you're going to see a lot of cards that you don't see elsewhere because they really do try to stand out. It's going to be a lot of refractors from the 2000s, stuff that isn't quite vintage, it's not quite modern, it's just kind of in between, you don't see a lot of it. The reason I do that first and foremost is because I enjoy it, but it's also because people will come to your table and say, whoa, that's really cool. I've never seen these cards before. And they're going to remember you. They're going to come back again in the future. And that's the good part about this, guys. It's making those connections and kind of setting a brand for yourself at these card shows. I promise the final note here, this also ties into being very cordial, being friendly, being fair with people, being open to offers. All of these things you have to come in with that mindset of when you set up for the first time. Because as I'm sure you or I, if I went to a show and had a bad experience with a dealer, it's probably going to be pretty unlikely I'm going to go back to that table again in the future. So my seventh tip here is to have fun with it first and foremost. Don't worry so much about how much you sell. Worry about how many connections you make, what you've learned for the future that's going to help you, and I think you're going to be in a really good spot. So if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to like down below, subscribe, maybe throw a comment in there, and I hope to see you in a video again in the future. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with me.